Welcome back to the news. Okay, everybody, the pre-patch is out in all regions, meaning there are things to talk about because there's been a bit of confusion. There's been many bugs, and the UI, which in principle is basically a great move, does have issues. So let's dive in. And lore lovers, I've got a big treat for you because a few neurons connected, and yeah, I think I know what's up. Well, as always, pre-patch has not really been the smoothest experience in the world. It launched with a bunch of UI bugs. Spells weren't appearing in the right place unless action bars were set to always show. Some settings were not being saved on lockout. They've got some visual errors and honestly, a whole bunch more. I mean, one of our guys actually had a host of problems getting team frames to even appear in Arena. And here's a fun tweet. Yeah, healing stream totem launched with no cooldown, which is a rough look. Mythic Plus loot broke. The scaling for all content seems off, to the tune of it being harder. So let's hope these things get worked on, and, you know, having some teething issues is normal enough, but the UI really does feel like a beta. I mean, really, it should have been marked as such, because right now, shit don't make sense. Because there's stuff that feels missing. I mean, buff and debuff filters, which we've been mentioning for months, minimap resizing, grid snap alignment, padding issues, enemy cast bar movement, bag bar movement, micro menu movement, XP bar movement, the list goes on. Those are silly things that should be there, so I think this should be called beta, and Blizzard should make clear what features we can actually expect to see be added to this over the Dragonflight patch cycle. I am totally happy for this to be a beta, by the way, but they should just take the L and not oversell it. The current emissions are just bizarre. But thankfully, the community has kicked into gear. We will have a video on essential add-ons soon. And smooth segue into something that's not essential, but it is good, and it's our Patreon. We've got a bunch of pretty dope loot and a special that is running till the end of this month. So if you want to get loaded up on some awesome art, awesome pins, and the class card, then hey, that's the thing to do. Also, for Patreon and channel members, we've got early access to content, including by now one video from our big Dragonflight lore series and 2 audio versions of that, as well as our whole lore walking podcast and a whole bunch more, including early access videos. Honestly, patrons, you have no idea how incredibly helpful you guys are. It really does mean a lot, and hopefully, you know, we're able to give good shit back in return. So you can check out the link down below. Okay, next then, a few changes. First, the character limit is now 60, up from 50. Then, legendary effects do work inside Shadowlands areas, but don't work outside of them, with Covenant abilities being treated the same way. And a funny part of this is how a few Covenant abilities, of course, got mirrored into talents. But if you use the talent version, it puts the Covenant ability version on cooldown. So I guess in a way you can build around already having that power to squeeze more out of your talents. Now on that, the Mage Tower has been closed until sometime after Dragonflight. Basically, it would be a bit off, and given that we're doing a talent revamp and all of that, I think Blizzard almost certainly doesn't want to create a situation where, you know, there's a window of time where the Mage Tower is untuned to the point of not being a viable game feature, or ends up being so easy that it feels busted and it kind of diminishes the achievement of getting it. So it's unfortunate, but I at least understand why they're doing it. And then also, Time Walking Mythic Plus, of course, has ended. That was only for the Legion expansion, and for Blizzard's perspective, that doesn't really make sense anymore, given that older dungeons will be a part of regular seasonal rotations. Next then, Shadowlands is now part of the base World of Warcraft subscription, as is normal. And finally, some good news, work orders are getting tested on beta. Finally. They really did cut it kind of close in those, and to be honest, a lot of details, they are kind of coming together rather late in the game. That's the core game news for today. Next, we've got the big lore. Legacies Chapter 1 is out. And in a way, it's straightforward, in that we see a heavily abridged version of the Dragon Aspect's origin story, albeit without the Watcher tier, which was odd. So, Noz Dormu is essentially educating the Drakthir on history, specifically their fight against Galakrond. One that Tyr should be in, because he literally did fight alongside them, famously losing his hand in the process. Maybe we'll learn more of that? So it's kind of interesting they chose to cut that out and focus in on just the dragons. I suppose it would have felt odd to have included Galakrond's kind of silly canonical death, where he basically just has a big rock shoved down his throat. So in a way we don't learn too much here, but it clicked for me. So Nosdormu does speak of an ancient enemy returning, and that as they did, the dragons that is, the Drakthir will have to make a difficult choice. Now on that choice, I wonder if that is having to turn against those of their own kind who side with the enemy, because a bunch of Drakthir do side with the Primalists. As for an ancient enemy returning, that's harder to know, because he could just be referring to the primal incarnates, who are essentially the anti-dragon aspects, who have clearly, at least for Raszageth anyway, broken out of jail. But that's just an internal threat. I mean, ancient enemy to me speaks of something else. I mean, hell, what if Galakrond is like somehow coming back? Well, on that, a Titan lore book found in Uldaman basically has us hear that Yogg-Saron had corrupted living waters, and that the Titan Keepers could be assured that the evolution of another Galakrond will not be triggered by ingesting filtered water. As a side note here, Tirshold, also known as Oldoris, is the big Titan complex on the Titan Isles. It has a thing called the Halls of Infusion, which kind of acted as like a big water filter for old god corruption / infuser of order magic. But anyway, from this, it seems like Galakrond came about through Galakrond consuming Yogg-Saron corrupted stuff. And that actually makes a lot of sense, because Yogg called himself the god of death, and to a lot of players that kind of didn't really make sense, especially thinking of like Zovaal and everything. Unless you remember, though, with this, that those consumed by Galakrond would somehow rise up in a form of undeath. Now, going back to the ancient enemy that Nosdormu spoke of then, is it Galakrond, that ancient enemy? Or is it the thing that we learned created Galakrond, Yogg-Saron? And that gets me thinking, because funnily enough, Yogg-Saron was shown to be active during the Legion pre-patch questline. But we've basically not heard a peep from Yogg-Saron since. The focus was N'Zoth. Now what if N'Zoth's doings were of course also masking a move for Yogg-Saron? That would be a fairly old god thing to do, because we know that the old gods basically do work together when times are tough. And this got me to a thought. Dragonflight could reintroduce Yogg-Saron and Galakrond and tie them into the plot line with Nosdormu and Morozond. For we've been led to believe, so far anyway, that Nosdormu's turn to the infinite dragon aspect Morozond was at least in some way helped by old god interference. Now it's hard to tell, but all of this seems, it does seem like the sort of background machinations you would expect for old gods. And then it got me thinking about some of Nosdormu's lines in this as well. They stood out to me. He says that it's his fate to see all of time, and that his story is written, while the Drakthir's is only beginning to unfold. Now, does that strongly imply fate? I think it kind of does. That they're not carving their own path, instead they're walking along their fated path, with the point being that fate describes the outcome, but that which you experience to be free, they're not carving their own path, right? Instead, they're kind of walking along their fated path. But the thing there that a lot of people can miss is that even though they're walking, this fated path, fate describes outcomes, but it does not describe the experience of walking that path, which is an experience where the illusion of free will be experienced, right? I mean, it's that idea that you, and I don't mean you specifically, that you would always make the choice that you end up making, given all that you know and who you are and how you think. But the thing is that you, with the brain that you have, right, you'll always make that choice. But in your experience of making that choice, you have the illusion of doing something else that realistically you would never do. Now, let's not dive into determinism and free will and, I guess, Sam Harris-like things, but suffice to say, I have a feeling that Blizzard want to touch on that, right? Because the way that Nosdormu speaks is very much like, there is the pure timeline, the real timeline, that his story is written within that. Right? It's this ordered view of time with a true timeline. And to me, that's clearly just Titan bullshit when you think about how they've set up order and disorder to oppose each other. I basically think that what the Titans told Nosdormu is the true timeline. I think that is just one potential timeline. It just happens to be the one where the Titans win. And that's why they want him to treat it like the only true path. So this kind of, honestly, this is what linked with me today in my head when I was writing today's video, right? This kind of realization. I think this, if the flights in-game actually realize this could play a key role in the expansion. I mean, hell, I actually think that realizing this is what is going to turn Nosdormu into Morozond, right? Because he speaks of seeing the true end. Because in the end time instance, whenever Morozond says, like, he basically sees the true end, and actually this end time with the old gods is preferable, because the true end is so bad. And that is then when it really clicked for me. What if Nosdormu cannot see past his own death? That would mean that he would never be able to see the end result of the timeline he was charged with protecting. So what if he sees that his death is actually just part of a Titan plan, and that whatever is brought about by that plan, of which his death is a part, that would be a very bad outcome? Is order winning really a good thing? What does absolute order mean? Well, here's a quote. "And now at last it comes. You will give me the ring freely. In place of the Dark Lord, you will set up a queen, and I shall not be dark, but beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night, fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain, dreadful as the storm and the lightning, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair." So that's what Galadriel says if she takes up the ring. Hell, I mean, even Sauron, the character, has this kind of like window of redemption at the start of the Second Age and is super motivated by order. And by the way, on that, just a thing, if you are watching Rings of Power, I mean, whatever, you do you, but it is literally a non-canon adaptation, like even in terms of the legal rights stuff. So yeah, the kind of legit version of Tolkien and characters like Galadriel, that is in books, not in Rings of Power, just so that you don't get confused with the point I'm trying to make. But anyway, Galadriel's dark timeline, if she like takes up the ring, it kind of shows us this idea of, you know, the thing that we think may be good. Galadriel literally, you know, called the Lady of Light, that, you know, gone too far, it's very bad. And I think that's what Nosdormu will get a glimpse of in this expansion, and I think that's how he will turn into Morozond, right? As a big rebellion against this terrible, terrible fate that he was charged with dying to bring about. And honestly, I think that actually could be really great lore, because the whole thing of like the details of Nosdormu's turn, that's always been a fascinating thing. And if it is along the lines of what I'm speculating here, I actually do think that would be a pretty satisfying resolution to the mystery. Then finally, just change to Thundering, which is the new affix for Dragonflight, or at least Season 1. So it's changed again. It now impacts all 5 players with debuffs, making it so that players also only get stunned if there is a possible person they could clear their debuff with within 100 yards. And that makes it so that, I guess, a single death doesn't cascade like uber hard. Then the stun for failing the mechanic is 4 seconds down from 8, and the damage done by it is a little less catastrophic, and marks can be removed using immunities, which overall is pretty good changes. It also means you can safely run back to the group if you die to the affix, and overall it's a pretty elegant solution to applying this debuff to 5 players, but only 4 players being able to clear the mechanic. And with that said, that basically is it for this week's WoW News. At the very least, I hope you found that lore segment interesting. It certainly was pretty interesting to me. And if you'd like more lore, including the Lore Walking podcast, of which there's really quite a few episodes, maybe it's like 5 or 6 hours of content now, that's over on our Patreon, as is the art that we'll physically mail to you. There's also a special running until the end of this month for even some bonus art that looks absolutely gorgeous. So there's all that going on. It's the best way to support what we do. And of course, the likes of early videos and all that, they happen over there as well. So patrons, thank you. If you want to join, you can see the link down below. With that said, that's it for today.